Hello and welcome to Rule of Carnage. This is a podcast series where your hot and sweaty hosts here in the UK's sweltering heat try to record whilst the fans are on. So apologies for any audio disturbances. We're here to talk about designing better miniature games. My name's Mike Hutchinson. I designed some. His name's Glenn Ford. He's designed some other ones. We even designed some together. When we design games, pretty much universally, we've designed them to have winners and losers. And unfortunately, sometimes you both end up with 3 points and it's a draw.
Mm.
And then we all go home, not knowing who won. How unsatisfying.
Yes. Yes.
Do we need to deal with this? Can draws be fun? Should draws be fun? Can we just wave over the things of draws? You do always have to write a tiebreaker rule, though. That is something I've learned.
Yes. And what makes a good tiebreaker rule?
Oh, I've got a really good one in Space Kids.
I mean, my wife's sister. We went playing crazy golf ages ago now, actually, while my wife was still my fiance, and we got to the end of it, and by four people. By some incredible concatenation of chance, we all scored the same at the end of whatever it was. I don't know, 15 holes of crazy golf.
Wow. Well, celebration. Everyone is on an equal
I
footing.
I said, oh, how lovely, everyone gets to win. And my wife's sister said, no, everybody lost. So that was a total waste of time. And I think that's like, I think that is an important part of
Glenn is here bringing up the topic of player personas.
Well, it's
Maybe these are just human personas.
So it's like one of the discussions that perpetually circles around on the game design boards of Board Game Geek is in relation to semi-co-op games. And a lot of the argument around that centers on the fact that if you've got a semi-co-op game that has a winner and ranked losers or something like that, or ranked winners, or a draw across everybody who isn't the winner, then you've got a load of losers. You have a winner and a load of losers. The point I'm making is that the claim there is that the definition of what is winning and drawing and losing is not within the hands of the game designer, but are
they're social constructs,
external facts, that they are like 1 + 1 = 2. The person who scored less than the winner is a loser is just a definition of what happens to you when you score less than the winner. And I'm not entirely sure that I agree with that idea. I do think that it is available to the game designer to decide what is or isn't a draw and a win and a loss. So Pukeapocalypse doesn't have draws because it has a person who didn't lose, and then everybody else is in a state of having either lost or definitely lost. And at times it can have more than one person who didn't necessarily lose. But the assumed state in that game is that you are a loser and you have lost until you have achieved something that means that you technically didn't lose today. And so there's no theoretically in the game there's no drawing, there's just you are still in a state of having lost,
right?
And I think one of the things that people find so unsatisfying about draws is that draw is the beginning state of all games, or most games,
right? So it feels like we resolved nothing, we progressed in no way.
Yeah, we did not advance the game state, and
we didn't advance the social interaction state. More importantly, we didn't advance our status relationship.
Yeah, it's like throughout, games teach you that the most important thing to do in any given turn is to advance the game state. It's like whenever I'm, playing a co-op game with friends, everyone's going looking at their turn, going, "Oh, well, but what's going to advance the game state?
Yeah.
Don't do that. It's just going to return us to where we were at the start of the turn. Do that. That's what advances the game state." And when you end a game with a draw, it's basically said, well, we haven't really advanced the game state. We shuffled the cards around, and we've moved some bits, some stuff around the tabletop, but we haven't actually advanced anything. There's a game of patience. A lot of games of patience do this, but there's one in particular which ends with the deck of cards stacked, if you do it correctly, ace to 13 in the sets of suits. So if you get a deck of cards clean out of the pack, shuffle it up, play that game of patience, and complete it, you have returned to exactly the state you were at before you cracked the seal on that deck of cards. And sometimes drawing a game feels like that was the definition of a pointless experience. We may as well have just not cracked the seal in the first place. We could have all saved ourselves some time.
Although that one that you've provided as an example does sound extremely satisfying as a anti-entropy uh, pill.
Well, many ordered states are the highest state of entropy in certain systems. So, that's a whole other kettle of fish to get into. But yeah, so how can it be that a draw is satisfying? How can it be that a draw is interesting? The obvious, and not always available to most games, but maybe it's part of the secret to this, is if you think about league play, for example, where each game provides you with a certain number of points, and whether or not you're within a certain band within a table becomes very, very important. Drawn games in many sporting leagues towards the end of a season become some of the most exciting games that there are, like fighting for a draw, because is what will get your team out of the relegation zone, or into the the promotion zone, become incredibly,
so some kind of meta concern.
and yeah, so campaigns tend to be the thing that we use, advancement systems, things like that, wherein drawing means that both participants get to advance within the overall campaign or progression system, can therefore make draws interesting, because it means, well, both of you get the points and get the advancements. So that's an interesting and useful thing. You have definitely advanced the meta game state, further on from where you were before you started play. I think that tiebreakers are a controversial subject, I reckon, for many people, because the idea that you play through a whole game,
Yeah, I mean it trivializes the whole, so if a draw is making no advance, proving nothing, resolving nothing, having no sort of status exchange, the tiebreaker just does, but it just cheapens the whole deal. And it's like, well, we spent 3 hours and we may as well flip a coin, and it doesn't feel like that status exchange is worth as much.
Mm.
It's not
No,
as juicy.
absolutely. It feels like it's like sometimes I'll be playing, playing a game, and there is a certain sort of player type who will chant for you to roll double ones on miscasts, or cheer when the dice come up in a completely unreasonable way. And I always feel like, is that really how you want to win the game? It's like there's a theoretical game in relation to luck and skill, which they dice chess, which is normal chess, but at the end of the game of chess, you roll a dice, and on a one, you reverse the result of the game. And the point is that the world grandmaster of chess will still be the world grandmaster of dice chess. It will just take more games to find out that he is the world grandmaster.
Yeah.
And I always think I imagine a certain sort of player playing a game of dice chess, losing horribly, rolling the dice, getting a one, and going, "Hooray! I'm a great player of this game. I am a champion, and I deserve this."
Maybe. I mean, I think like the rolling double ones on the miscast, I think points at something important from my point of view for this conversation, which is given that we have different player types, there are people looking for different kinds of fun in games.
Mm,
And for people who are look like closer to my player type and they play games on some level to pull levers and see whether anything explodes. And then if
mm.
something does explode, like I'm almost not paying attention for the end of the game because the explosion already happened. I've already won. Like, justice has been served. And so like from my perspective, I guess one thing is that we had a couple of the guys at Salute Fringe ran a Space Gits Git Bash event last weekend, and we played a bunch of different games of Space Gits. We had 4 tables, and they all played 3 or maybe 4 games, so it's somewhere between 12 and 16 games of Space Gits, and we had 2 draws in all of that. These were like 4-player games, and the 2 draws, like the game itself only takes 30 minutes. The game is very chaotic and dumb stuff is happening at all times. They both had like 4 or 6 caps or whatever it was each. And so they'd not quite nicked enough stuff to be the clear winner. But then the 2 people, the tiebreaker resolution in that game is you get 10 seconds to build as tall a tower of dice as possible. At the end of the 10
Mm.
seconds, the tallest standing tower is the winner of that. And for those tables that ended up with a draw, like number one, the game is structured and the event was pitched in so much as the winning was really not much of a focus. Like the fact that you had showed up, built 3 orcs, and then had a kind of chaotic, unusual miniature game experience with 4 other people around the table and you didn't win, like it wasn't, not a lot of light was thrown onto that as a
Mm.
thing to aim for. Plus, like the resolution mechanic was kind of silly and fun and locked into the sort of carnage of the rest of it. And I suppose the point I'm coming to is if the journey was fun to a certain player type, and I think there was a overabundance of that player type at this event, the journey is sufficient that the destination is not as relevant to account for the value of having spent that time. If we got to a draw,
Yeah,
that doesn't mean we wasted all this time that we were laughing and chortling and having fun with each other. It just means, well, that's how some games end.
yeah, no, and I, I jest slightly at the idea of a draw, meaning that all of the time was totally wasted. But still, at the same time, I think even if you're not totally invested in winning, it's still it's still nice to have a full stop at the end of the story. It's still nice for the coder to just be like, "Oh, and I don't care who won, but who happened to win? Oh, God knows. I'm not really sure." That nobody in particular isn't as much of a satisfying thing. Oh, he won. Oh, nice closure. Now I can move on a little bit, and you don't have to like be like, oh, I really want to know who won. Be
Yeah,
like,
no, I understand. I understand.
I,
I think that that's it's also quite a difficult thing to engineer for because it's only partially a concern of the game design. It's partially a concern of the like the group of players, the type of players around the table, the environment
mm,
that they're playing in.
I mean,
But yeah, I mean, if you are leaning into designing for like, I guess the question is like, how often are you getting draws, and are you designing the game in such a way that draws happen more than perhaps they could if you designed it differently? And that's definitely something to look out for.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. I think however the game is designed, you should try and find a state where draws are rare.
I
And then
mean, like Space Kids, for example, like we all throw an even number of caps in, and then we add an odd cap to make sure that there is, a higher chance of ending up with an uneven number of caps.
yeah, yeah. So the two-player version of Space Skits has a thing to help it from only having a draw quite rarely. Obviously, if you're playing with like 3 or 4 players, is probably where you got like a higher number of draws. Something like Warhammer has a very high number of points on the table and a very low like margin for where an actual draw falls out. So it's like the odds of you actually happening to score the same number of points
Right. So
in Warhammer Fantasy Battle.
granularity can be a useful tool there.
Yeah,
If your scoring system is very granular, then it's more likely that we end 1 or 2 or 3 points either side rather than bang on the same. If we can only score 1, 2 or 3 points, then a draw is quite
yeah,
more likely.
exactly. Yeah, if the game's going to be like, yeah, one person gets 1 point, you get between 1 and 3 points in a game of Warhammer Fantasy Battle. Each side gets between 0 and 2,000, or usually like 3,000 points because of banners and things. And there, the odds of those two scores being like literally the same are incredibly low. So
Right, particularly because there's granularity in the like input to that. Like the lists can have like, a goblin unit that's 37.5 points.
Yeah, exactly. So like you can design your game away from resulting in draws. I think returning to the Space Gits tiebreaker sort of thing, I think that's a good example where bad tiebreakers, like you say, are often you finish the game, there isn't a result, count random thing that nobody knew was important until this particular moment, and whoever has the most of that suddenly becomes the winner, which
Hmm.
is often very unsatisfying. And if that doesn't decide it out, roll a dice, and it's like those are just, I would rather just have a draw at that point. Don't I might my first piece of position is don't have those kinds of tiebreakers in. You can have draws.
And yeah, unless you're signifying them up front as like a secondary scoring condition, because that's
I
essentially
mean,
what they become at that point.
yeah, absolutely. If you're gonna have like the okay, other thing becomes
Yeah,
important.
like if like in Pacific Command, like if saving your capital ships is important and you could have a tiebreaker that's like most enemy capital ships sunk is the winner of a tie, just make it a victory point, like add it into the scoring system.
Yeah, and I think sort of slightly want to come on to the idea of scenarios in a second, but it's like in relation to Space Gits, having the mini game at the end of Space Gits, which is a single 10-second dice tower stacking thing, it's completely within the spirit of Space Gits that this sort of spectacle moment of a tower being taller or falling down or not is a way of ending the game. You
Yeah, and it's sort of like, not to get too funky about it, but it's like it's sort of testing the same skill. It's like it's creating a sort of contained iconic. It's like if you could say in Warhammer Fantasy Battle, if there is a tie, play a really fast game of Warhammer Fantasy Battle and see who can win in 20 seconds.
yeah, absolutely. And it's like if there's a game of like a four-player game of Space Skits, and then there's two people stacking that tower at the end and two other people shouting at them as they do it, that in many ways is a perfect ending of Space Skits. The thing that's sort of is like if there's a two-player game and it ends with 10 seconds of quiet muttering as two people hunch over the table and try and stack a tower. Like, oh, but that idea of like there being a group of people and people shouting and you frantically stacking dice, I think is the right ending
I
to.
think we're just proving here that even two players, Space Gits is better as a spectator sport.
But yeah, if you can have like a mini game moment that feels satisfying and appropriate to the game, and it's not going to be suitable for every minis game.
Yeah.
Part of it is because Space Gits is so fast moving and so sort of chaotic in its nature. Yeah, obviously having games in which draws are incredibly rare or unlikely. It's like Gaslands, the Gaslands Death Race
I think it's
draws.
impossible.
Draws are, I think, technically
Yeah, I
impossible.
think they're functionally impossible if you play by the rules.
Yeah, so that's one way of doing it. I think what is the thing that can work for most miniatures games, frankly, is a well-written scenario that sets out the meaning behind a win, a loss, and a draw for each side within the particular scenario that you are projecting. If this is a scenario that's about a noble last stand, and it comes out as technically a draw, you can say what that meant for the people selling their lives dearly, what it means for the people trying to kill them off. Don't leave a draw as, you know, two numbers are equal, now we finish. You can have a scenario set out. Look, this is the meaning of this particular engagement. This is the meaning of what will happen if this set of events occurs or this set of events occurs. And I think a really good scenario can be like, I think Pacific Command has some good examples of this, where the victory conditions are a set of quite narrative events. You're claiming this particular airfield, you're destroying this particular carrier group. And at that point, you can have a draw that is quite nuanced, where it's like, well, the victory points are equal for both sides, but they claimed the airfield and they destroyed their carrier groups. And that can be a draw that has a lot of richness to it, and a lot of sort of detail and understanding that helps you to understand that something advanced. It's lovely when the journey is the destination, but it's also, I think, even for competitive players, to be able to get to the end of the game and have a detailed and nuanced coda to a draw, I think is much more satisfying than a draw that is simply a sentence that ends without a full stop. So for me, it's like a well-designed scenario that gives a richness to a draw. I think is a great way that almost any miniatures game can sort of hopefully deal with it.
One thing that I experimented with in Pacific Command, which is fun in the context of this conversation, is creating asymmetrical scenarios where one player starts with 5 victory points and then the other player has to like work their way up from 0 to the starting place. And in that case, like a draw in that sense can be like a Herculean mountain to climb because it's an asymmetrical scenario, and like the victory conditions are like literally mathematically describing the asymmetry rather than you feeling like, oh well, I'm starting with a smaller force, therefore like I can't really win. It's like, oh no, he's starting sitting pretty on 5 victory points, like I'm being challenged to work up to that. And then if I get like within 1 victory point, I'm like, I nearly got you. And that can be an exciting, that can be an exciting sort of tie scenario.
Yeah. So I think, like, in short, in relation to draws, don't have a tiebreaker that is meaningless and disconnected from the rest of the game.
Mm-hmm.
Um, if a draw is better than that, um, try to design a game that has few or no draws in it anyway. But that should be a given. And I think if you're going to have a game that has to have draws and isn't going to have tiebreakers, give a scenario based detail and flavor and richness to the draws that occur within your game.
I think that, just to catch on that last point, to underline it from a sort of very non-competitive standpoint, if you're making a miniatures game that's supposed to behave more like a role-playing game, like I think that becomes even more like absolutely central to it. This is probably just because I've been like rereading Inquisitor this week and thinking about very narrative skirmish games, but like how do you make a narrative skirmish scenario work? Well, it's going to be by having a really strong idea of what's happening in the narrative, what's happening in the story. And so, just in the same way that like a clear like historical reenactment scenario is going to have that understanding of what victory, draw, and loss means. The same could be true, like even if you don't really have any victory conditions because that's not the point of what you're trying to create, and therefore like everything's a draw because we're not actually counting points. You
Hmm.
still need a sense, you still want, I think, to come away with a sense of like narrative closure, even if you didn't get mathematical closure. And ultimately they're kind of the same thing because winning or losing is just part of a story that we're telling.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and yeah, for some sort of meta structure is a great out for why draws can be interesting and fun and relevant to all the participants.
Yep.
Well, if you have experienced a draw in your gaming life, you are probably not alone. But if you experience one that was exciting, thrilling, and satisfying, that might make you a little more unusual. And the information of that could be helpful or interesting to others. So get down in the comments section and tell us about it. If you are in the comment section typing and pressing buttons, type and press on the subscribe and like ones. That's always lovely for us to see. And then why not look at the links section just below the video, where there's a link across into our Discord, where you can talk about this subject and others. There are links through to our Patreons, where you can support the channel directly. And there are a swathe of links across to places where you can buy the things which what we make and sell and make us happy to see number go up. For now, though, I think from this episode of Rule of Carnage, it's going to be a thank you and goodbye. So thank you and goodbye. Bye-bye.
See you next time. Bye.